Hi folks, today we're going to be discussing Chapter 36, Digestion and Human Nutrition. All animals are heterotrophs, and heterotrophs are organisms that can't make their own food, therefore they need to eat something. Imagine plants are autotrophs, so they make their own food. However, animals are heterotrophs, which means that they must eat to stay alive. That means that heterotrophs typically digest food inside their body but outside of their cells. And the digestive system is the system that mechanically and chemically breaks down food down to molecules that are absorbed into our internal environment, and we expel any unabsorbed residues. The digestive system interacts with other organ systems to maintain homeostasis for the body as a whole. Remember, homeostasis is that balancing act to make sure that you're not eating too much or too little. Some invertebrates, those are organisms without backbones, have an incomplete digestive system, but most invertebrates and all vertebrates have something called a complete digestive system. So an incomplete digestive system would be a sac-like digestive system where food enters and leaves through the same opening. We don't have that, right? You don't eat and poop out of the same opening. We eat with our mouths and then we excrete waste through our rectums. A complete digestive tract is what we have, and that's a tube-like digestive system where food enters through one opening and waste leaves through another. So here's an example of an incomplete digestive tract. These are in jellyfish and cnidarians, and so basically food is going to enter into this digestive stack, and anything that is not digestive will leave the same opening. Same with these jellyfish. We, on the other hand, have a complete digestive system. This should look familiar to you. So you have your mouth, which is where food will enter, and then you have your anus, where any waste will be expelled. There are 5 tasks of the digestive system. The first task is mechanical processing and motility. Basically, what that means is you're breaking down food and moving it through the system. So the movements that break up, mix, and directionally propel food material. For example, when you take a bite of something, you're going to chew it and swallow. And so that's you mechanically processing and moving the food. The second task is secretion. In your digestive tract, you release substances, especially digestive enzymes, into the tubes of your body to help you digest that food. One example would be when you take a bite of food, you have saliva in your mouth, and saliva is going to be breaking down the carbohydrates in your food. The third task of the digestive system is the digestion itself. So that's the breakdown of food into particles, then to nutrient molecules small enough to be absorbed. An example would be the gastric acid in your stomach, which will break down carbohydrates into single sugars and proteins into amino acids. The fourth task of the digestive system is absorption. That's the uptake of digested nutrients and water across the gut wall and into extracellular fluid. So this is when those proteins get broken down into amino acids, and those amino acids get absorbed into your intestines and then get delivered to other cells in your body. And the final task of the digestive system is elimination. This is the expulsion of undigested or unabsorbed solid residues. So this would be you pooping or peeing. There are some diet-related structural adaptations. So features of an animal's digestive system are shaped by natural selection and adapt the animal to a particular diet. For example, a bird's beak size and shape determines what kind of food it can process. Is it going to be eating large seeds or small seeds or insects or plant material? The teeth of mammals differ depending on their diet. For example, carnivores, like this tiger, are going to have very long and sharp teeth for tearing. Herbivores, those are organisms that only eat plants, those are going to have prominent incisors for grazing and flat molars for grinding the food. So think about like the mouth of a cow. Now, humans, we are omnivores, so we eat both plant material, but we also eat meat, and so we have a little bit of everything. Other diet-related adaptations include animals' guts are also specialized to their diets. For example, seed-eating birds have a large crop for storing food, and then they have, which is found here, and they have something called a gizzard. And the gizzard, what it does is it's going to grind those seeds down and release the materials inside them. Whenever you buy a turkey on Thanksgiving, they usually stuff the gizzards inside the bird, and you can make gravy with them. So now you know a gizzard is used to help birds digest seeds. Ruminants have multiple stomach chambers that maximize nutrients extracted from plant foods rich in cellulose. Plants are made of fibers called cellulose. And what happens is in these ruminants, which are cows and goats, microbes can ferment that cellulose in the first two chambers, and the solids in the second chamber form something called a cud that is regurgitated for a second chewing. So if you've ever seen a cow or other ruminant animals and they're always chewing, what they're doing is they're swallowing the grass they eat. They're letting the microorganisms in their guts or the bacteria in their guts help them digest that grass, and then what they do is they will regurgitate it and then they will chew on it some more. Ruminants are hoofed mammals with multiple chamber stomachs, and a great example of a ruminant would be a cow. So here's an example of a cow, and what you can see is the cow is going to swallow, and then it has multiple stomachs where it will be digesting the grass and spitting it back up for the cow to chew. It's a fantastic video that describes how ruminants digest food, and I highly recommend that you watch it. So key concepts. Animal digestive systems. Some animal digestive systems are sac-like, but most are a tube with two openings. Remember, that's the incomplete versus complete digestive system. And the structure of an animal's digestive system often reveals adaptations that allow the animal to eat a specific diet. For example, antelope have teeth for grinding that allow them to eat grasses. The way this chapter works is we're going to be talking about the human digestive system very broadly, and then we're going to be describing very specific structures throughout the lecture. So humans have a complete digestive system with specialized regions for digesting food, absorbing nutrients, and concentrating and storing any unabsorbed waste. Salivary glands, the pancreas, and the liver are accessory organs that secrete enzymes and other substances into the tubular portion of the system. Your gut, when stretched out, is 6 to 9 meters long, so it's a huge part of your body. So an overview of your digestive system. Food is taken into the human mouth, and is chewed and swallowed. And once swallowed, it's going to move into the pharynx, which opens up onto the esophagus. The peristalsis is the movement of the esophagus to get the food from point A down into the stomach. So peristalsis is basically the movement of the esophagus to get food down into the stomach. From the stomach, food enters the small intestine and then the large intestine, which is also called your colon. So if you ever heard of colon cancer, that's cancer of the large intestine. And then wastes are stored in the rectum until they are eliminated through the anus. This is a terrific overview video of all of this and kind of helps you see everything animated. So your esophagus is the muscular tube between the throat and the stomach, and peristalsis is the wave-like smooth muscle contractions that are going to propel food through the digestive tract. That's why you can still swallow water or food even if you're hanging upside down, or astronauts who are up in space can still swallow even though there's no gravity because of that peristalsis. And your stomach is a muscular organ. The stomach is a muscular organ that mixes food with acid and digestive enzymes that it secretes. Your small intestine is the longest portion of the digestive tract, and the reason why is because it's the site of most digestion and absorption. So your small intestine is where the majority of nutrients are going to get absorbed into your body. The small intestine receives secretions from the liver and pancreas to help it with the digestion and absorption of nutrients. And then the colon or large intestine receives digestive waste from the small intestine and concentrates it as feces. It also absorbs water and salts. So the rectum is where feces are stored prior to excretion, and the anus is the opening through which digestive waste is expelled from a complete digestive tract. So key concepts. In humans, food is taken into the mouth. It's mechanically broken down by teeth. Saliva starts the process of chemical digestion. The stomach stores and continues the chemical digestion of food. And digestion is completed and absorption begins in the small intestine. And the large intestine is where waste will be concentrated and eventually expelled. So let's start talking about digestion now in much greater detail. Step 1, you take a bite of food. Mechanical digestion begins in the mouth when teeth break food into smaller pieces. Human adults have 4 types of teeth: incisors, canines, premolars, and molars. and each tooth consists of bone-like dentin with a crown covered by enamel, and the hardest material in the body is that enamel. And these teeth, depending, like your molars are there to grind any type of leafy material. Chemical digestion also begins in the mouth. Saliva is secreted by salivary glands, and it contains enzymes, including enzymes as well as bicarbonate and mucins. This is considered an exocrine gland. If you remember from your exam 1 materials, exocrine means that this gland is going to secrete something out. Bicarbonate is going to neutralize acid, and mucins keep the chewed up food sticking together. You have a very specific enzyme in your salivary gland, and it's called amylase, and that breaks down starches and sugars. So the salivary gland is an exocrine gland that secretes saliva in the mouth, and in the mouth is the beginning of starch breakdown. The stomach is a muscular, highly folded, stretchable sac with a sphincter at each end. A sphincter is basically a muscular ring that controls the passage of things in and out. It stores food and continues the process of digestion that began in the stomach. The stomach has 3 functions. It stores food and controls the rate of passage to the small intestine. It mechanically breaks down food and secretes substances that aid in chemical digestion, which is called gastric fluid. Cells that line the stomach secrete gastric fluid, which includes mucus, hydrochloric acid, pepsinogen, and an inactive form of a protein digestive enzyme called pepsin. So gastric fluid is the fluid secreted by the stomach lining, and it contains digestive enzymes, acid, and mucus. And these digestive enzymes are really bad. Like hydrochloric acid can burn holes through your skin. So it's really important that your stomach contains these digestive juices. If you've ever heard about people getting shot in the stomach or stabbed in the stomach, usually those types of injuries are really bad because you don't want that gastric fluid to leak into the body and start digesting your other organ systems. Your stomach has a rhythmic contraction that mixes your gastric fluid with food to form something called chyme. So this mixing occurs about every 3 minutes. If you don't have any food in your stomach, that mixing is what causes that rumble, and it signals that you're hungry. So chyme is a semi-liquid mixture of food and gastric fluid that can be found in the stomach. Arrival of food in the stomach triggers cells to secrete that gastrin into the blood, which stimulates acid secretion by cells of the stomach lining. When the stomach is empty, gastrin secretion is inhibited. So your stomach is not going to be releasing gastric fluid like that acid into the stomach unless food is present. Acid in the stomach is what breaks down proteins and exposes their peptide bonds. Remember, proteins are made of amino acids, so the stomach is the first place where those proteins are broken down into amino acids. Carbs are first broken down in the mouth by saliva. Please know where each nutrient is broken down in the digestive system for your exam. Now, there are some disorders that you may be familiar with. The first one is gastroesophageal reflux. Another term for that would be acid reflux or heartburn. What happens is the sphincter between your esophagus and the stomach doesn't close all the way, and that acidic chyme will splash back into the esophagus, which just causes that heartburn feeling or acid indigestion. And this is a terrific video that shows you how that happens. Another stomach disorder is ulcers. When the stomach's protective mucus layer is disrupted, the gastric fluid and acid can start to erode the stomach lining. Most ulcers are actually a result of a bacterial infection. So this is kind of crazy. This Australian doctor was trying to figure out what causes stomach ulcers. So he started taking gastric fluid from people's stomachs who had ulcers. And what he found was he kept finding this bacteria called Helicobacter pylori or H. pylori. And so he thought maybe this is what causes ulcers. But the problem was he can't do human testing. Like you can't ask a bunch of humans to drink bacteria and see if they get stomach ulcers. So what he did was he did the experiment on himself. And so what he did was he took pictures of the lining of his stomach, and then he drank the bacteria, and lo and behold, a few days later, he developed ulcers. And so that's how they figured out that stomach ulcers are actually caused not necessarily by stress and diet, but by this bacteria H. pylori. So please know that stomach ulcers are caused by bacteria, and understand that gastroesophageal reflux or acid reflux is caused by the sphincter not closing properly between your esophagus and the stomach. Once chyme leaves the stomach, it's going to leave through the pyloric sphincter, which is found here. Literally, it's the gateway into the small intestine. The small intestine is the longest segment of the gut and has highly folded linings with many projections that increase surface area for digestion and absorption. Within your small intestine, there are millions of hair-like villi, which is shown here, containing blood and lymph vessels that project from the intestinal lining. The epithelial cells, called brush border cells, are at the surface of a villus, have even smaller projections called microvilli. Collectively, all these folds are what allow for your steak dinner to be absorbed into your bloodstream. So all these folds and all these cells are going to absorb the carbohydrates you ate, which get broken down into simple sugars, the proteins, which are going to get broken down into amino acids, and some fats. So villi are multi-celled projections at the surface of each fold in the small intestine. So these are the villi. And then brush border cells in the lining of the small intestine, an epithelial cell with microvilli at its surface absorb the nutrients. And then you have even smaller projections called microvilli. Chemical and mechanical digestion are completed in the small intestine. That means anything that can be digested that you've eaten is going to get broken down by the time it makes it to the small intestine. The small intestine is going to receive chyme from the stomach, enzymes and bicarbonate from the pancreas, and bile from the gallbladder. So your small intestine doesn't just receive the food that's been digested in the stomach, it's also going to be receiving fluids from the pancreas, as well as the saliva and bile from your gallbladder. Bicarbonate is going to raise the pH of the chyme enough for digestive enzymes to function. So if you eat a very acidic meal or you drink a Coke, which is incredibly acidic, your body's going to release something called bicarbonate, which is going to raise the pH of that chyme enough so that the digestive enzymes that your body makes can work. I do expect you to know how carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids get digested in the body. So carbohydrate digestion. First off, the first place that carbohydrates get digested is in the mouth. The saliva starts the breakdown of carbohydrates. Carbohydrates get broken down into simple sugar. So if you've ever heard of someone on a low carb diet, that's because carbohydrates, once broken down, get broken down into glucose and fructose and other simple sugars. Pancreatic amylase breaks carbohydrates into simple sugars as well. So the pancreas releases an enzyme called amylase that breaks down carbohydrates. Once these carbohydrates are broken down into simple sugars, those sugars are actively transported into brush border cells and then out into the intestinal fluid in the villus, where they enter the bloodstream. That's why, like, if you eat like a Pixie Stick or a Jolly Rancher, your blood sugar will spike very quickly because those are simple sugars. Whereas if you eat something that has more complex sugars in them, like whole wheat bread, it's going to take longer for your blood sugar to spike. So here we have our carbohydrates. They get digested into single sugar molecules. And the first place that digestion occurs is going to be in the saliva of your mouth. And it's going to continue in your small intestine where pancreatic amylase is going to continue to break down those carbohydrates. Once those carbohydrates become simple sugars, the brush border cells in your intestines are going to absorb that sugar, and that sugar will then be released into your bloodstream, where it will get delivered to cells that need sugars. Protein digestion is a little bit different. Protein digestion starts in the stomach, and proteins get digested into amino acids. So again, pancreatic enzymes will continue to break proteins down from polypeptides into amino acids. So the first place that proteins get broken down is in the stomach, and then the breakdown continues in the small intestines. Once proteins are broken down into individual amino acids, they're actively transported throughout the body to cells that need various types of amino acids. And then fat digestion is a little bit different. Movement of the intestinal wall is going to break water-insoluble fat globules into small droplets. Have you ever poured oil into water? So if you're making a pot of spaghetti, maybe you put some oil in your water to keep the spaghetti from sticking to each other. And you'll notice that the fat in that oil is going to all come together because it's hydrophobic. Fat does not like water. So what happens is, so that you can break down fat in your body is going to have to break down big globs of fat into smaller and smaller droplets. So what we use is something called bile salts. Bile salts are made in the liver. They're stored in the gallbladder. And what they do is they basically prevent fat globules from coming together and becoming really giant mounds of fat in your small intestines. So they cover the fat globules so that they stay nice and small droplets. So bile is a mix of salt, pigments, and cholesterol produced in the liver and then stored and concentrated in the gallbladder. Please know that the liver makes bile, but the gallbladder is who stores and delivers it to the small intestine. And what bile does is it keeps your fat droplets suspended in fluid and keeps them from coming together into giant globs of fat. Fat is going to be broken down into monoglycerides, and those monoglycerides are then going to be transported to various cells that need fat. This is a terrific video. I highly recommend you watch this whole process. Here's a great picture. So here's a big old fat globule. Let's say you ate a really fatty steak dinner and you have these chunks of fat in your small intestines. What happens is the bile salts, which are delivered by the gallbladder, are going to cover the fat globule and help it break it down into smaller and smaller lipid droplets. And then those individual fats will then enter into your bloodstream through your brush border cells and be delivered to cells that need the fat. If you haven't heard, fluid, especially water, is very helpful in digestion. Each day, 7 to 9 liters of fluid from food, drink, and secretions from your stomach, accessory glands, and intestinal lining enter the small intestine. About 80% of the water moves across the intestinal lining and into the internal environment following an osmotic gradient created by transport of salts, sugars, amino acids, and through the brush border cells. So you need water to help you get your sugars, your fats, and your proteins into your bloodstream. It also helps with the elimination of waste. There are various digestive disorders that you've probably heard of before, including lactose intolerance. People who do not produce a sufficient amount of lactase, which is an enzyme to digest lactose, what happens is they have way too much lactose in their large intestine, and bacteria in your large intestine will try to break it down, and when they do, they produce a ton of gas, which can cause farting or flatulence, bloating, and cramps. So someone who's lactose intolerant, they don't make an enzyme specific to lactose in the body. And lactose is a sugar found in yogurts and ice cream and milk. So people who are lactose intolerant can't drink dairy or eat dairy products. So a closer look, the stomach is an expandable sac that secretes acidic gastric fluid. The small intestines has a highly folded interior and huge surface area for the absorption of fats, proteins, and sugars. And the small intestine receives enzymes from the pancreas and bile from the gallbladder. And the bile is made in the liver, stored in the gallbladder, and the gallbladder is who delivers that bile into the small intestine. The large intestine. Any material that can't be digested, any dead bacteria, any cells, and some water from the small intestine is going to enter into your large intestine or colon. Your large intestine completes the process of absorption where it concentrates, stores, and eliminates waste or feces. If you eat something like corn, you'll notice that you don't digest corn very well, and then that will be what is expelled in your feces. So feces are unabsorbed food material and cellular waste that is expelled from the digestive tract. The first part of the colon is a pouch called the cecum from which the appendix projects. Many of you may not have your appendix now. Something you should know about your colon is home to millions and millions of bacteria, and that's good. If you ever heard about probiotics, those are bacteria that you eat to help with your digestive tract. The appendix, we think, might actually be really important in evolution. What scientists believe is the appendix, which is this little pouch right here off of your large intestine, is actually there to store your normal bacteria. So if you get really sick or take an antibiotic, what happens is the bacteria that are stored in your appendix can then leave the appendix and help populate your large intestine again. And these bacteria are super important. For example, you get vitamin K from the E. coli that are living in your large intestine. Contractions of smooth muscle in the colon wall mixes the colon's contents and slowly propels materials along it. Conditions favor growth for normal flora or bacteria, for example, E. coli, which makes vitamin B12 that we absorb across the colon lining, and vitamin K. Signals from your autonomic nerves cause the colon to contract forcefully and propel feces to the rectum, which activates a defecation reflex to expel the feces. That's why you don't really have control on when you want to poop. Like, it's going to happen when your nerves tell you it's going to happen. Emotional stress, a diet low in fiber, minimal exercise, dehydration, and some medications can lead to constipation. And constipation pretty much is the inability to poop. Infections can cause an episode of diarrhea, and autoimmune disorders can cause chronic diarrhea, such as Crohn's disease, where basically in Crohn's disease, your immune system is attacking your colon. Appendicitis often occurs after a bit of feces lodges in the appendix and an infection sets in. And some people are genetically predisposed to develop colon polyps, which can become cancerous. That's why people who have colon cancer in their families will go in and get a colonoscopy, which is when they put a camera up your rectum and look around. And what they're looking for are these polyps, which could become cancerous in your large intestine. Cells continually synthesize and break down carbohydrates, fats, and proteins into smaller organic compounds that include sugar, amino acids, and triglycerides. These compounds are burned as fuel in aerobic respiration, which we talked about last chapter, stored, or used in synthesis of larger organic compounds. So your body's like a factory, and the building blocks for the various structures and organelles in your body are going to be those sugars, amino acids, and triglycerides. The nervous and endocrine systems regulate their molecular turnover. So your nervous and your endocrine system are what are going to determine your metabolism. The liver has a central role in metabolism as well as homeostasis, or the balance within the body. First off, your liver is what makes bile. It also controls the amount of amino acid levels in the blood. It controls the amount of sugar in your blood. It removes hormones that serve their function from the blood. It also removes toxins and breaks down old, worn out red blood cells and stores iron. So if you ever hear like you don't want liver damage, that's because your liver literally detoxifies your body. Diets profoundly affect your body's structure and function, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture and other government agencies research diets that may help prevent diabetes, cancer, and other health problems. You can generate your own healthy eating plan by visiting the USDA website, myplate.com. You might have grown up with a food pyramid or with MyPlate. I grew up with a food pyramid, but this is the new recommendation by the USDA. So MyPlate consists of half a plate of fruits and vegetables and then a quarter plate of grains and protein, and also includes dairy and water. Now there are pros and cons to both of this. Pro is this is really easy to understand. Anyone, it doesn't matter your age, would understand this. But a con would be, how big is your plate? Right? Like, how big are these portions? And also, like, where's dessert? Because if you go to a wedding, you're probably going to eat the wedding cake. And so some people really like MyPlate, and some people like to just point out the cons. The USDA nutritional guidelines include lower intake of refined grains, saturated fats, trans fatty acids, or added sugars, and caloric sweeteners, and salt. So basically, the USDA is saying don't ingest any extra sugars, salts, or fats. You should eat more vegetables and fruits with high potassium and fiber content, and eat fat free or low fat milk products. About 55% of calories should come from carbohydrates, preferably complex carbohydrates, which take longer to digest. Fresh fruits, whole grains, and vegetables, especially legumes like peas and beans, provide complex carbohydrates. You can provide energy, essential vitamins, and fiber. And processed carbohydrates, that would be your white flour, refined sugar, and corn syrup, provide empty calories and just spike your blood sugar, which makes you hungry, and then you eat more, which starts a vicious cycle. We do have something called essential fatty acids. So lipids are used to build cell membranes and energy stores. So these are your cell membranes. And essential fatty acids are fatty acids that the body cannot make and must obtain from the diet. So if you're on a very low fat diet, you may be lacking essential fatty acids that are necessary for your cells to maintain their membranes. Monosaturated acids, like in olive oil, may help prevent heart disease when substituted for saturated fats. The way I remember monosaturated versus saturated fats is saturated fats are going to be solid at room temperature. Unsaturated fats or monosaturated fats are going to be liquid. Cells can make some amino acids, but 8 essential amino acids must come from the diet. So if you're a vegetarian, you need to be careful that you have a well-balanced diet so that you get the amino acids that you cannot make on your own. And amino acids are the building blocks for proteins. Most proteins in meat are complete. That means that their amino acid ratios match that of humans' nutritional needs, so they contain both essential and non-essential amino acids. Most plant proteins are incomplete. They lack one or more amino acids essential in your diet, and that's why vegetarians can obtain all required amino acids by combining complementary foods such as beans and rice that contain all the amino acids that you would need. Please know the difference between vitamins and minerals. I always ask this question on your exams. To function properly, the body requires small amounts of vitamins and minerals in addition to major nutrients. A vitamin is an organic substance required in small amounts for normal metabolism. So a vitamin comes from something that's living because it's organic. Mineral is an inorganic substance that is required in small amounts for normal metabolism. And a mineral would be something that has never been living, so it comes from the earth. Most people can get all the vitamins and minerals they need from a well-balanced diet. In addition to vitamins and minerals, a healthy diet should include a variety of phytochemicals, which may reduce the risk of certain disorders. And phytochemicals are basically the chemicals that make our foods various colors, so orange, green, red, blue, purple. So this is just an example of phytonutrients. Have you ever heard of lycopene? It's found in tomatoes and it's supposed to help prevent prostate cancer. So key concepts. Nutrients absorbed from the gut are raw materials for a synthesis of complete carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins in the body. A healthy diet is low in salt, simple sugars, and saturated fats, and provides all nutrients, vitamins, and minerals necessary to support metabolism. Maintaining a healthy weight requires balanced energy input with energy expenditure. So it's what you put in and then how much you work off. For most people, this means eating recommended portions of low-calorie, nutritious foods and exercising regularly. What's interesting is physicians all around the country, including here, use something called BMI, or body mass index, to determine if you are within a good weight range. So a BMI is your weight in pounds versus your height in inches. But BMI is actually pretty flawed. If you are a weightlifter and you have solid muscle mass, that's going to weigh heavier than fat. So if you're 5'2" and you're a bodybuilder and the majority of the weight on your body is muscle, you're going to still be considered obese by your BMI. And this is the formula in case you want to figure out what your BMI is. I don't really like BMI because if you're really tall and skinny, it could be off. Or if you are shorter and you are a bodybuilder, then your BMI is going to be off. Body weight distribution also predicts risk. For example, fat deposits above the waist, also known as the beer belly, are associated with heart problems. A Harvard study linked weight and risk of cardiovascular disorders and gives estimates of ideal weights for men and women. So if you have a big gut, or like you see folks with like really big beer guts, that's usually an indication of future cardiovascular disorders or heart disease. To estimate the number of calories that you need, you can use this calculation. This will not be on your exam. This is just an FYI. So why is obesity or being heavier so unhealthy? Obesity increases the risk of type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease, breast and colon cancer, arthritis, and gallstones. Excess fat distends fat cells and impairs the function. So if you have excess fat, it's going to get stored in your fat cells. Those fat cells are going to start to trigger an inflammatory response and interfere with the action of insulin. There are two different eating disorders I expect you to know for your exam. The first one is anorexia nervosa. This is when a person who has access to food routinely eats too little to maintain a healthy weight, and this can damage systems throughout the body. So this is someone who does not eat, even though food is accessible. Bulimia nervosa, or binge and purge eating, is when someone will binge or eat a lot, and then what they'll do is they will induce vomiting to get rid of that food. And that erodes teeth and increases your risk of cancer in the esophagus and disrupts iron and pH balance. Here's a hotline and also a support website if you or someone you know is dealing with either eating disorders. Maintaining body weight requires balancing calories taken in with calories burned in metabolism and physical activity. And a body weight far above or below normal increases the risk for health problems. These are your key terms, and this is your student learning objectives or your study guide for the exam.